My daughter-in-law slept with my husband just 1 week before we were set to sign the divorce papers. And instead of throwing plates, screaming in rage, or storming out the door, I sat there in silence wearing the same calm smile I had perfected over decades of marriage. Because what I did next, well, that was the part no one in my family ever saw coming. Before I continue, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it left you speechless? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what emotions this story stirs in you. And tell me where you're watching from. It means so much to see how far my story travels. Don't forget to subscribe and join this community. We grow stronger together when we share, reflect, and support each other. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 67 years old, a retired school teacher, and I live in the quiet suburbs of Pennsylvania. For 44 years, I was the woman who made sure everyone was cared for: my students, my son, my husband. I taught English literature, and I used to tell my students that every good story had a turning point. What I never imagined was that the turning point of my own life would arrive so late, with betrayal pouring through my front door like a cold draft I could no longer shut out. The house Robert and I built together still carried the echoes of family dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. You'd think those memories would shield me, but instead, they made the sting sharper. It wasn't just that Robert had turned his back on me. It was that he had done so with Jessica, the woman my son trusted as his wife. The layers of betrayal folded over each other until I could hardly breathe. Yet I did not scream. I did not cry. I waited. I learned about the affair not from whispers or vague suspicions, but from something undeniable. A text message Robert forgot to delete flashing across his phone screen as he left it on the kitchen counter. I shouldn't have looked. But after 44 years of marriage, you know when a man's patterns shift. He had been coming home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, smiling with an ease he no longer gave me. And there it was, in black and white, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, telling him she couldn't wait for the day the papers were signed so they could finally stop sneaking around. I remember the moment like a still photograph, the late afternoon sun sliding through the blinds, dust hanging in the air, the tick of the old wall clock keeping time with my pulse. Everything ordinary except for the crack splitting through my world. And yet, my hands did not shake. Years of teaching restless classrooms had taught me patience, and years of marriage had taught me silence. So I placed the phone back where he had left it and carried on as though nothing had changed. That evening, when Robert walked through the door, loosening his tie, I greeted him with the same warmth I always had. "Dinner's in the oven," I said, as though my heart hadn't just been carved in half by the woman who sat across from me at Sunday dinners. He kissed my cheek absently and disappeared upstairs. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of pot roast filling the air, and promised myself something I had never dared before: I would not be the victim in this story. Over the next few days, I carried the secret like a stone in my chest. Jessica called often, her voice syrupy sweet, as she asked about family plans, her laughter echoing down the line like nothing had changed. But her words carried a cruel undertone now, one I hadn't noticed before. I caught her watching me across the dinner table with eyes too sharp, too calculating, like a hawk circling over prey. Michael, my son, saw none of it. He loved Jessica with a devotion that made my throat ache. He worked long hours at the hospital and returned home each night grateful for her support, never suspecting she was dismantling his family from within. And Robert, my husband of over 4 decades, walked through the house as if the walls weren't closing in on all of us. I told myself I would wait until the divorce meeting. I would let them think they had cornered me, that I was too tired, too old, too broken to fight. That was my mask, the weary wife who had finally given up. What they didn't know was that beneath the mask, my mind was sharper than it had ever been. You see, when you're 67, people assume you've run out of surprises. They mistake your silence for weakness. But silence can be a blade sharp, hidden and deadly effective when used at the right moment. So I continued to cook Robert's favorite meals, to smile politely at Jessica's small talk, to nod when Michael spoke of his future with the woman I knew would ruin him. I played the part so well that even they believed it, but inside I was watching, recording, waiting. I spent long nights in the living room sipping tea while the grandfather clock chimed the hours, imagining the moment when their smug expressions would falter. And I whispered to myself, "Patience, Margaret, patience." Because I had learned something my husband and daughter-in-law never did. Sometimes, the greatest power is not in the storm, but in the calm before it. And as I stared out the window at the garden Robert and I planted 40 years ago, I knew storms were coming. What they didn't know was that I had already begun preparing the ground. After that night when I stared out at the garden whispering patience to myself, the house seemed to change. Or maybe it was just me who had changed, seeing it with new eyes, sharper, colder. Every creak in the wooden floorboards, every shadow that stretched across the old wallpaper seemed to whisper reminders. This was once a home, and now it was just a stage where betrayal rehearsed its lines. Robert and I had lived here for 44 years. We bought this old cedar frame house in Pennsylvania when I was only 23, still flushed with the excitement of being a bride. We planted roses by the porch together. We painted the kitchen cabinets the color of buttercream so the room would feel warm, even in the middle of harsh winters. For decades, I believed those walls held us steady. But houses don't keep families together, people do. And the people I had trusted most were the ones undoing me. Michael, my only son, was born in this very house. I can still hear his baby cries echoing down the hallway, the way his tiny hands reached for me when thunder shook the windows. I raised him with love, with books and lessons, with the belief that loyalty was something you could hand down like a family heirloom. And for a long time, I thought I had succeeded. But then Jessica arrived. Jessica was beautiful in the way that turned heads at the grocery store. Tall blonde with perfect teeth and a laugh that could fill a room. Michael met her at a hospital fundraising gala where she worked as a junior event coordinator. He told me she was different from the others, ambitious, polished someone who knew what she wanted out of life. I remember smiling when he said that, even as a knot formed in my stomach. Ambition is a wonderful thing, but I'd seen enough of the world to know it can also be a blade sharp enough to cut through anything in its way, even people. Still, I welcomed her. I set the dining table with my grandmother's china the night Michael brought her home for the first time. She called me Mrs. Collins at first, then quickly shifted to Mom as if claiming me before I could decide how I felt about her. And I let her. I let her into this house, into my son's life, into the family I had spent a lifetime protecting. Looking back, I can see the moments when Robert's attention shifted. Small at first, staying longer in the living room when Jessica was visiting, laughing harder at her jokes than he ever did at mine, complimenting her cooking in ways he hadn't complimented mine in years. At the time, I brushed it off. He was just being kind, I told myself. After all, wasn't kindness part of what made Robert the man I married? But kindness isn't secretive. Kindness doesn't hide behind late nights at the office or hushed phone calls taken out on the porch, and it certainly doesn't leave the bed cold while offering warmth to someone else. The distance between Robert and me grew like a crack in the ceiling, imperceptible at first, then spreading until the plaster threatened to collapse. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing when I wore the pearl earrings he once gave me for our anniversary. He'd come home, eat in silence, and retreat to his study with the door shut. I used to press my ear to that door when he wasn't home, remembering how he once read aloud from his favorite history books. Now it only hummed with secrets I wasn't meant to hear. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the familiarity of the betrayal. The realization that Robert and Jessica had rehearsed their parts right here under my roof while I moved through the scenes like an extra in a play that no longer needed me. Michael's sweet boy that he has never noticed. He worked long shifts at the hospital saving lives while his own was quietly being dismantled at home. He would come over on Sundays with Jessica holding her hand as though she were the best thing that had ever happened to him. And I smiled. I smiled while Jessica complimented the roast chicken, smiled when Robert poured her an extra glass of wine, smiled even when I saw her hand brush against his, under the table, quick as a snake's strike. Did I imagine it? I asked myself that question 1,000 times. No mother wants to believe her son's wife is capable of such treachery. No woman wants to believe her husband is willing to stoop so low. But my instincts were louder than my denial. They screamed the truth every time Robert left without explanation, every time Jessica's eyes flickered with something sharper than affection. I remember one evening in particular. The four of us sat in the living room, the fireplace crackling as snow fell outside. Michael had dozed off in the armchair, exhausted from a 14-hour shift. Jessica was flipping through a magazine, her legs crossed elegantly, her smile just a little too satisfied. Robert leaned over to refill her wine glass, their eyes meeting for half a second longer than necessary, and me, I sat on the couch knitting my hands steady, even as my heart roared. That's when it struck me they thought I was blind. They thought age had dulled me, that grief had softened me, that I no longer had the strength to see clearly. But I did see. I saw everything. The irony was unbearable. I had spent my entire life teaching my students to look for themes in literature: betrayal, loyalty, greed, redemption. Now those very themes had taken root in my own home, and I was living through a story that begged for a climax. Sometimes when I walked through the old cedar halls at night, I'd place my hand against the wood and whisper, "You've held us for 44 years. Hold me just a little longer." The house groaned back as if it understood. This wasn't just timber and nails. This was the theater of our lives, and I was preparing for the final act. Because while Robert and Jessica played at their secret romance, and while Michael remained blissfully unaware, I was already drafting a different ending. An ending they would never see coming. The night after that silent scene by the fireplace, I thought I had grown used to the weight of my secret. But secrets are never truly carried alone. They leave traces, little ripples that reach others whether you intend them to or not. I didn't expect the knock on my door the following afternoon. It was a hesitant sound, as though the visitor wasn't sure they belonged there. When I opened the door, I found Linda. Linda was Jessica's older sister, 3 years her senior, with the kind of weary grace you see in women who have lived too much life in too little time. Her brown coat was buttoned all the way to her chin, her knuckles white from clutching her handbag as if it were a shield. She had never come to my house unannounced before, and her eyes that day told me she hadn't come for pleasantries. "Mrs. Collins," she began, but her voice cracked. "Margaret," I corrected gently. "Come inside, dear. It's cold out there." I led her into the dining room, the same room where I had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, the same room where Jessica had once smiled at me across the table like a dutiful daughter-in-law. Now Linda's hands trembled as she set her bag down. I offered her coffee pie, anything to ease the tension. She shook her head. "Margaret," she whispered, leaning forward as if afraid the walls might overhear her. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything." Her words sent a chill through me, though I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Tell me." She looked at me, then eyes rimmed red as if she'd been crying for days. "It's Jessica and Robert. They're having an affair." I had known, of course. I had seen the messages, the glances, the way Jessica's perfume lingered on Robert's shirt. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it come from someone outside the circle of lies, made it real in a way my own suspicions hadn't. Still, I folded my hands neatly in my lap, my face a mask of composure. "Are you certain I asked?" Linda nodded miserably. "I saw them myself, at that little cafe near his office. They weren't just meeting, they were holding hands, kissing, acting like lovers. I confronted Jessica about it afterward. Do you know what she said?" She laughed. "She laughed, Margaret. And then she said it wasn't my business. She called you old, boring, said Robert deserves better." The words cut like shards of glass, but I didn't flinch. My heart cracked silently inside me, but my body gave nothing away. "She bragged," Linda continued, her voice breaking. "She said once the divorce is final, she'll make sure you get as little as possible. She's been planning this. Marrying Michael was just her way into the family, into the money, and she's been working on Robert for months. Margaret, she's going to destroy everything." I stared at the tablecloth, the cream-colored linen I had ironed smooth just that morning. My hands, spotted with age but still steady, traced the edge of the fabric. For a moment, the house around me blurred the framed photographs, the familiar furniture, all of it tainted now by the confirmation of betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Linda reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, trembling. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but good to us, and you don't deserve this. And Michael, my nephew, he doesn't deserve to live in this kind of lie." Her eyes filled again, spilling over. "I love him. I love both of you. And I can't stand by while Jessica tears your family apart." I looked at our joined hands, hers smooth and young, mine worn from decades of labor and love. It struck me then betrayal had come from those closest to me, yet truth arrived from a direction I least expected. "Does Michael know?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, and I don't know if I should be the one to tell him. It would destroy him." I rose slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the backyard garden. The roses we had planted decades ago bloomed stubbornly, even in the chill of autumn, their red petals vivid against fading leaves. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, yet beneath it all, the roots were rotting. "What are you going to do?" Linda asked from behind me. I turned back to her, and in that moment, something shifted inside me. The shock that had once paralyzed me was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. Calculation, patience, resolve. Nothing I said calmly. Linda's eyes widened. "Nothing I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation. I'll smile. I'll play the devoted wife, the naive mother-in-law. Let them think they're winning. Let them believe I'm too blind to see, too weak to fight. But Margaret..." I raised a hand to silence her, my voice soft but unyielding. "Some games require patience, Linda. And I've been patient for a very long time." Her tears slowed confusion flickering across her face, but she nodded. She understood more than I expected. "Does Jessica know you came here?" I asked. "No, she thinks I'm at work." "Good, it needs to stay that way. Can you keep this between us?" She hesitated, then nodded. As she gathered her things to leave, the air between us felt heavy, charged with both sorrow and conspiracy. When the door finally closed behind her, I stood in the quiet of my house listening to the echo of her confession. They thought they were clever Robert with his practiced charm, Jessica with her youthful ambition. They thought I was a tired old woman past her prime, but the truth spoken by Linda that afternoon had lit a fire inside me. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the same ritual I had performed every day for decades. But the taste was different now, bittersweet, laced with resolve. Let them play their game, I thought. Let them laugh and plan. They had no idea I had just learned the most powerful lesson of all. Silence is not surrender. It is strategy. And when the time came, it would be my move. After Linda left that afternoon, the silence in my house felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was sharp, like the edge of a blade I had only just remembered I carried. Her words hadn't surprised me, but they had solidified something inside me. Confirmation. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right all along. And so I decided to change the rules of the game. Anger would have been easy. Confrontation would have been satisfying for a moment. But satisfaction is fleeting, and I had lived long enough to know that fleeting victories are the ones that cost you most dearly. No, I would not scream. I would not throw Robert's clothes out the window or slap Jessica across her smug, youthful face. Instead, I would do what I had always done best. I would listen, watch, and wait. But this time, I would also plan. I could not rely on the family lawyer Robert trusted. He had played golf with Richard Sterling for years, and I knew where Sterling's loyalties would fall. If I wanted to protect myself, I needed someone outside their circle. Someone sharp, unshakable, with no history of Friday night dinners in my dining room. That's how I found Susan Clark. Her office was in a brick building across town, far from the neighborhoods where Robert's friends might gossip. I made the appointment quietly, telling no one. When the day came, I drove myself there, my hands steady on the steering wheel, though my heart beat like a drum. Susan was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that filled the room without effort. Her desk was neat, but her gaze was sharper than any file she could pull out. She shook my hand firmly, studying me not with pity, but with respect. That alone made me feel stronger. "Mrs. Collins," she began. Why don't you tell me what brings you here?" For the first time, I said the words out loud. My husband is having an affair with my daughter-in-law, and they believe I'm too blind, too weak to stop them. They're planning to strip me of everything when we divorce. Susan didn't flinch. She simply nodded as if betrayal were just another line item she had seen 100 times. "Tell me what you want, Margaret." I sat straighter in my chair. "I want what belongs to me. My home, my security, my dignity, and I want them to learn that I'm not the fool they think I am." A flicker of something admiration maybe passed over her face. She pulled a stack of legal pads toward her and asked for documents. Deeds, financial records, old trust papers. I had brought everything I could find from the fireproof box Robert rarely touched anymore, the one my father had once handed me when I was just a young bride. She flipped through the papers quickly, her brow furrowing, then lifting. "Well," she said after a long silence, "this changes everything." I leaned forward. "What do you mean your father was a cautious man, wasn't he?" "He was," I said. "A farmer, but careful with every dollar. He always said wealth wasn't just about what you built, but how you protected it." Susan tapped a clause in the trust documents with the tip of her pen. "This trust, it isn't ordinary. Your father built in provisions to protect you and your descendants. Specifically, there's a clause tied to infidelity. If a marriage dissolves because of adultery, the innocent spouse retains all rights to the trust property. The guilty party forfeits everything." Her words sank in slowly like the steady filling of a glass. "So, if I can prove Robert's affair, you keep it all," she confirmed. "The house, the investments connected to the trust, even the land parcels your father added years ago. He can't touch them. He doesn't even know it, does he?" A laugh cold and bitter escaped me before I could stop it. "No. He thinks I'll roll over and take whatever scraps Sterling pushes across the table. He has no idea." Susan met my eyes. "Then the only thing you need is proof. Document everything. Photographs, messages, witnesses. The more you have, the stronger you stand." For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. Not joy, not relief, but power. Quiet, deliberate power. When I left Susan's office that day, the air outside felt crisper, sharper, as though the world itself had shifted. I walked to my car with steady steps, my mind already cataloging every look, every glance, every late-night excuse Robert had given me. All of it was evidence now. That evening, when Robert came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine, I greeted him with the same calm smile. I served dinner, asked about his day, laughed at his shallow jokes. But as I watched him, I was no longer the naive wife he believed me to be. I was a collector gathering proof like coins in a jar. Every secret meeting, every hidden message, each one brought me closer to the moment when silence would turn into revelation. Jessica called later that night, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She asked if I needed help with anything around the house. "You know, Mom," she said, her words carefully, measured, "you shouldn't carry so much stress at your age. Let us take care of things. Let us handle the future." I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "Oh, Jessica," I replied softly, "you'd be surprised how much I can still carry." When I hung up, I looked around the house, my house, the cedar beams, the photographs, the garden outside that had weathered more storms than Jessica could imagine. She thought she was clever, sliding into my family with her ambition, sliding into my husband's arms with her charm. But she had underestimated me, because I wasn't just a wife waiting for betrayal to finish its course. I was my father's daughter, and he had given me more than this house and land. He had given me the foresight to protect what mattered most, and now I would use it. After leaving Susan's office with the truth tucked like a weapon in my purse, I knew the next act would play out not in a courtroom, but at my own dining table. The house had always been the stage for our family, and Sunday dinners were the performances where everyone played their roles. This one would be no different, except that I had begun writing my own script. The table was set the way it always had been. My grandmother's china, polished silverware, the linen tablecloth that still carried faint traces of decades of laughter and spilled wine. I roasted chicken the way Michael liked it, baked a pie the way Robert once adored. Everything appeared ordinary, even warm. Only I knew that the air was charged, the kind of thick stillness that comes before a thunderstorm splits the sky. Jessica arrived first, all bright smiles and clicking heels. She swept into the kitchen as though she owned the space, wrapping me in an embrace that smelled of expensive perfume, the same scent I had found lingering on Robert's shirts. I let her arms slide around me, my hands resting gently against her back as though I didn't notice the venom in her sweetness. "Mom," she said brightly, "you look wonderful. You've been taking such good care of yourself. That's so important, especially now. Don't you think it's time you started focusing on your happiness?" Her words dripped with faux concern, each syllable carefully chosen. Happiness was not advice. It was a knife slipped between my ribs, reminding me that she and Robert were already plotting the life they believed would replace mine. "Oh, Jessica," I replied softly, pouring iced tea into tall glasses. "I do think about happiness. All the time." Before she could parse my meaning, Michael arrived exhausted from another long week at the hospital. He kissed Jessica's cheek tenderly, oblivious to the poison she carried. To him, she was the devoted wife, the one who supported his long hours, who smiled at his stories, who made their life appear picture perfect. When Robert came last loosening his tie, Jessica's posture shifted. I caught it, a flicker in her eyes, a tilt of her head, as though the real performance was for him alone. He brushed past me with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, his shirt faintly scented with Jessica's perfume, confirming what I already knew. We sat around the table, passing dishes, making small talk. Michael spoke about a patient who had pulled through against all odds. I watched as Jessica leaned closer, her hand brushing his arm in a practiced show of devotion. But when Robert made a passing comment about the wine, her eyes darted to his, and something silent but unmistakable passed between them, an invisible thread tightening across the table. I cut into my chicken, my movements precise, my smile pleasant. "Michael, you must be so proud of the work you're doing," I said. He smiled at me, his eyes weary but full of quiet pride. "It's not easy, Mom, but it feels worth it." Jessica reached for his hand. "You see why I worry about you, though, don't you? All those hours, all that stress. It's no way to live a happy life." Her tone shifted subtly, her gaze sliding toward me. "And Mom knows what I mean. After so many years, maybe it's time we all start thinking about what really makes us happy. Don't you agree, Mom?" Michael looked puzzled, but Robert's fork paused midair. The challenge was there, hidden in Jessica's syrupy words. She wanted to see if I would break character, if I would lash out, and reveal that I knew the truth. Instead, I sipped my tea calmly. "Happiness," I said lightly, "isn't always about what you take for yourself. Sometimes it's about what you protect." Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered, turning her gaze back to Michael. "Exactly," she said, squeezing his hand, "and I just want what's best for all of us." I watched them carefully, each gesture, each glance catalogued in my mind. Robert laughed a little too loudly at one of Jessica's jokes. Michael leaned back, content, unaware of the game unfolding inches away from him. And me, I played my part. The hostess, the peacemaker, the aging mother, content to watch her family enjoy a simple meal. But beneath the calm surface, my resolve hardened. Jessica believed she was clever, guiding the conversation, planting seeds of doubt, slipping barbs into her sugary concern. She thought I didn't see how her fingers brushed Robert's hand under the tablecloth, quick and brazen. She thought her perfume was just another detail I'd overlook. But I saw it all. I smelled it all. I remembered it all. As dessert was served, Jessica leaned across the table, her smile radiant. "You know, Mom, life is too short to hold on to what doesn't bring you joy. Don't you think I set the pie knife down carefully, my reflection glinting in its blade?" "Oh, I couldn't agree more," I said, my voice smooth, my eyes steady. She thought she had won that moment. But what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that every word, every glance, every slip of perfume on Robert's shirt was no longer just an insult. It was evidence. The storm was building and they were too busy celebrating to notice the clouds. That night after they left, I stood in the quiet kitchen, the plates stacked neatly, the table cleared. The house smelled faintly of roast chicken and betrayal. I looked at the empty chairs, imagining the smug looks Robert and Jessica exchanged as they drove away. And then for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a smile, small, sharp, and certain. Let them believe they were winning. Let them mistake my silence for surrender. They had no idea that the dinner they thought they had controlled had already turned into my trap. The memory of that dinner lingered in my house long after the dishes were washed and the chairs tucked neatly beneath the table. Their laughter, their coded glances, the scent of her perfume clinging to Robert's shirt, all of it stayed with me like smoke after a fire. But smoke can be useful. It can hide what you don't want others to see. So when Robert announced almost casually that he had spoken with a lawyer about our arrangements, I didn't protest. I simply nodded as though the idea hadn't been planted in my mind weeks earlier. He said Sterling would handle everything. Richard Sterling, his old golfing buddy, the man who had toasted with him at more than one charity dinner. Best in the city, Robert said, straightening his tie in the mirror. He'll make sure this is painless. I smiled at his reflection, though my heart ached at the word. Painless for him, not for me. The following week, we walked into Sterling's downtown office. It smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cigars, the kind of place designed to remind you that power doesn't apologize. The conference room was vast, its table gleaming, its walls lined with framed degrees. Sterling himself was all silver hair and smooth words, a man who looked like he had never lost a case in his life. Mrs. Collins, he said, offering a hand that felt more performance than greeting, will keep this as amicable as possible. I nodded politely. Of course. Robert sat to Sterling's right, his face a mask of sympathy that barely concealed his excitement. Jessica had come too, sitting next to Michael at the far end of the table, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. She looked like a cat waiting for cream. Sterling slid a thick binder toward me. This is the proposed settlement. Very standard, fair considering the circumstances. I opened it, my hands steady though my stomach turned. According to their plan, I would receive the small downtown condo, barely livable, a place we had once purchased for an investment and never used. Along with it, half of a modest savings account and a small monthly stipend. Meanwhile, Robert would keep the family home, the land, the investments, the business. It was theft dressed up in legal language. This seems uneven, I said softly, never lifting my eyes from the pages. Sterling's voice was smooth rehearsed. Your husband has been the primary earner. The business requires continuity. The house, frankly, the upkeep would be too much for you. This arrangement allows you peace of mind. Peace of mind. What he meant was exile. They wanted me to vanish quietly, tucked away into a shoebox of a condo, while Robert and Jessica redecorated my home in their image. I could feel Jessica's eyes on me waiting. She wanted the explosion, the tears, the righteous anger that would prove me bitter and weak. Robert was prepared too. I could almost see the arguments he had stacked up, ready to justify his betrayal. Instead, I closed the binder with a gentle snap and smiled. You've thought of everything I said. Sterling looked pleased. We try to be thorough. Robert's eyes narrowed, suspicious at my calm. Margaret, are you sure? Yes, I interrupted softly. Where do I sign? The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Even Jessica's smile flickered, her hand tightening on Michael's leg. Sterling slid the pen toward me, still watching me, as though he couldn't quite believe I wasn't fighting. I signed my name slowly, each letter steady and deliberate. The same signature I had written on our marriage certificate 44 years earlier. A lifetime in ink now used to seal its undoing. There, I said, placing the pen neatly on the table. I hope this gives you everything you're looking for. Robert cleared his throat, clearly caught off guard. Sterling shuffled the papers with brisk efficiency, but I saw the relief in his eyes, another case neatly tied up, another woman outmaneuvered by polite words. Jessica squeezed Michael's hand, her eyes shining with triumph. It takes strength to put family first, she said sweetly, her voice almost trembling with delight. I met her gaze and smiled serene. Yes, it does. As the meeting ended, Sterling promised to file the papers by the next morning. Robert offered me a hollow thank you, his voice tinged with confusion at how quickly I had surrendered. Michael hugged me, whispering, "Mom, are you sure this is what you want?" I kissed his cheek. "Sweetheart, sometimes you have to know when to fight and when to accept reality." Jessica looped her arm through his, her face glowing with premature victory. To her, I was finished. To Robert, I was defeated. To Sterling, I was just another aging wife too weary to contest her fate. But they were all wrong. Walking out of that office, the cold wind of the city stinging my face, I felt a calm so deep it was almost exhilarating. They thought the battle was over. They thought I had given away my home, my legacy, my dignity. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the real war hadn't even begun. Because I had signed their papers, yes. But in my purse was a folder Susan had helped me prepare, filled with documents they didn't know existed. Proof of a trust that could not be broken, clauses they couldn't erase, and a plan I had begun writing the moment Linda walked into my kitchen. Let them celebrate, I thought, as I watched Robert and Jessica exchange a glance of victory. Let them believe I am finished. The sweetest revenge is always the one served coldest, and I had waited 44 years to learn patience. The papers were signed, the performance complete. Robert and Jessica left Sterling's office with triumph painted on their faces, while I walked out carrying a calmness they mistook for defeat. They celebrated, but I knew patience was a weapon sharper than any blade. What I didn't expect was that the truth would find my son before I ever revealed it. It happened only a week later. The night was ordinary, or so I thought. Michael had finished a late shift at the hospital. Jessica claimed she was meeting a friend from yoga, and Robert was, as usual, working late. I sat in my living room, knitting in the dim glow of the lamp, the house wrapped in silence. Then the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual steady tone. "Mom," he whispered, "can I come over? I didn't ask questions." "Of course, sweetheart." When he arrived, his face was pale, his hands trembling as though he had carried something too heavy for too long. He collapsed onto my sofa without taking off his coat. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the floor. Then, as if the words were burning inside him, he said, "I saw them. Mom, I saw the messages." The room seemed to still. My knitting slid from my lap. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and showed me. Messages filled the screen, words too intimate, too brazen. Robert and Jessica exchanging secrets not meant for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. Plans, promises, desires. Each line was a dagger, and yet I had already been pierced by these blades long before. Michael's voice cracked. She called him darling. She talked about when they'd finally be free, about how easy it was to fool me. I thought, God, I thought she loved me. His shoulders shook, and then he said the words that broke me. "I've lost everything." I reached for him, pulling him into my arms the way I had when he was a boy, afraid of thunderstorms. His tall frame folded into me, his sobs muffled against my shoulder. For years I had held him through scraped knees and heartbreaks, but this was a wound deeper than any I could bandage. "You haven't lost everything," I whispered steady, though my heart ached for him. "You still have me. You always will." He pulled back, eyes swollen, voice raw. "How can you be so calm? Dad betrayed you. Jessica betrayed me. It feels like our whole family is gone." I held his face in my hands the way I used to when I wanted him to listen closely, and for the first time I let him glimpse the truth I had been holding inside. "Michael," I said quietly, "I've known. For weeks now." He blinked, stunned. "You knew I knew, and I let them believe I didn't, because sometimes the only way to defeat liars is to let them weave their own noose." His mouth opened, then closed. Confusion warred with relief, sorrow with anger. "So all this time, I guess you've been pretending." "Yes," I said simply. I smiled at their dinners. I listened to their empty words. I signed their papers. And while they celebrated, I planned. He stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. The naive, gentle mother he thought he knew had been quietly sharpening her strategy while he worked night shifts at the hospital. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice small. "Because you weren't ready to hear it," I replied gently. "Because you needed to discover the truth on your own. And because my plan only works if they believe I'm blind." Tears slid down his cheeks again, but there was something else in his expression now, respect, maybe even awe. "Mom, what are you going to do?" I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "I'm going to protect this family, Michael. Not the version they've tried to twist, but the one that still matters. The one built on honesty, on loyalty. And you are part of that. You always will be." He dropped his head into his hands, exhaling a shaky laugh that was half despair, half relief. "I can't believe this is happening. Jessica, Dad, how could they?" "Greed," I said softly. "Ambition, vanity. People will sacrifice anything for those things, even the people who love them." At that moment, my phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed across the screen. I let it ring. Michael didn't need more wounds tonight. Instead, I poured him a glass of water the way I had done when he was a boy with a fever. He drank, and slowly his breathing steadied. He looked at me with a fragile hope I hadn't seen in years. "So you're not broken?" he asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. I'm not broken. I'm just getting started." The clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the moment when silence became alliance. My son now knew the truth, not just of their betrayal, but of my strength. Together we would face what came next. And when the time came to reveal what I had been hiding, Robert and Jessica would learn that the woman they thought they had outsmarted was the one who had been writing the ending all along. The night Michael broke down in my living room, confessing he had seen the messages, something shifted between us. My son was no longer blind, no longer the trusting man who thought loyalty guaranteed safety. He had stepped into the shadows I had been walking in for weeks, and though the weight crushed him at first, I could see a different fire flickering behind his sorrow. But betrayal, like rot, always runs deeper than the surface you first scrape away. A few days later, Michael called me again, his voice steadier but urgent. "Mom, you need to see this. Linda and I found something." Linda, the same sister who had been brave enough to sit in my dining room and speak the truth when silence would have been easier. If she and Michael had joined forces, it meant the dam was cracking faster than I anticipated. When they arrived at my house that evening, Michael looked grim, carrying a folder under his arm. Linda trailed behind, her eyes swollen as if she had cried through the afternoon. She placed a hand on the folder as Michael set it down on the table, her voice shaking. "She's not just after Robert," Linda whispered. "She's after you, Margaret." I opened the folder slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of papers that smelled faintly of Jessica's perfume, the one she wore, like armor. The first document froze me where I sat, a photocopy of my father's will annotated in Jessica's handwriting. Little notes in the margins, property values, inheritance, loopholes, arrows pointing to where she might gain the most. She had studied my family's legacy as though it were a prize to be dissected, not a heritage to be honored. Michael's voice was tight with fury. She had this hidden in her closet. She wasn't just planning to leave me, she was planning how to carve up everything you built. I turned the page and my breath caught. A life insurance policy, my name on the form, but the signature wasn't mine. Linda's voice cracked. "She forged it, Margaret. We checked. The company confirmed there's no record of you authorizing this." The room tilted slightly, though I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Jessica hadn't only seduced my husband or mocked me behind closed doors. She had stepped into something darker, something criminal. She had tried to make my death part of her strategy. Michael slammed a fist against the table, his voice raw. "She was planning to cash in on you, like you were disposable, like you were just in her way." I sat still, my mind reeling, yet terrifyingly clear. In that moment, the betrayal stretched wider than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a stolen husband, a broken marriage, a son deceived. It was my life she had tried to sign away with a pen that forged my name. "I told you she was dangerous," Linda whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've seen this look in her before. She doesn't stop until she gets what she wants." I looked at her, my heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude that she had chosen truth over blood loyalty. Sorrow that two sisters could be split by one's ambition so vile it threatened to poison them all. I placed the papers back into the folder, my hands calm though my pulse roared in my ears. "This isn't just betrayal anymore," I said softly. "It's a crime." Michael's eyes burned. "We take this to the police." "Yes," I nodded, "but not yet." They both looked at me, startled. "Not yet," I repeated. "Let her believe she is still in control. Let Robert cling to his fantasy. Every day they think they are winning is another day they reveal themselves more clearly. And when the time comes, the fall will be complete." Michael stared at me as though I were made of steel he had never noticed before. Linda wiped her tears, her breath shuddering, but she nodded. I closed the folder and slid it toward me. She wanted to sign my life away, but what she doesn't understand is that my father already signed his protection into law decades ago. She can forge my name, but she cannot erase his. The house was quiet around us, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel the only sound. I thought of my father, then the man who had planted roses in the yard, who had spoken often about foresight, about preparing for storms you couldn't yet see. His words had seemed overly cautious when I was young. Now they felt like prophecy. Jessica believed she was clever enough to rewrite history, but history written properly cannot be undone. Michael reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was tight, his eyes wet but unwavering. "We'll stop her, Mom." "Yes," I whispered, "but we will do it the right way. No shouting, no chaos. We'll let her trap herself in the lies she's spun. And when she thinks she has won," I allowed myself a thin smile, cold but certain, "we'll show her that some games don't end the way she expects." Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the garden. The roses stood tall despite the autumn chill, their petals red as blood against the fading light. They had survived storms before. They would bloom again. And so would I. The folder with Jessica's forged papers sat on my kitchen table for 2 nights, heavy as a stone. Every time I passed it, I felt the weight of what it contained, not only proof of betrayal, but the echo of something darker. This was no longer just about love gone sour or greed unchecked. It was about survival. Michael was the one who said the words aloud. "Mom, this is evidence, not gossip, not suspicion. Evidence. We can't just sit on it." He was right. And so on a gray Monday morning, we walked into the precinct together, the folder pressed to my chest like a shield. Detective Harris met us in a small office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with eyes that had seen too much and judged little. He greeted me with a firm handshake and studied Michael with the kind of silent compassion men reserve for sons blindsided by betrayal. "What have you got for me?" Harris asked. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it slowly. The forged insurance policy, the annotated copy of my father's will, notes in Jessica's hand, her greedy calculations scribbled in the margins. Harris flipped through each page, his brow tightening with every turn. "This," he said, tapping the signature line on the insurance policy, "is felony fraud if we can prove she forged it. And we will." Linda's voice was quiet from the corner of the room. She had insisted on coming, though she looked pale. "There's more," she said. "You should know this isn't the first time Jessica's been close to someone's death." Harris looked up, his eyes sharpening. "Go on." Linda swallowed hard. 2 years ago, our Aunt Carol died. It was sudden heart failure, they said. Jessica was the one taking care of her at the time. She moved into her house right after. Carol left it to her in the will. Everyone thought it was lucky timing. But now, her voice cracked. Michael reached over and squeezed her hand, steadying her. Harris leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Aunt Carol," he repeated. "And Jessica was living with her then, yes?" Linda whispered, and she was the one managing her medications. The room went silent. Harris finally stood pacing once before turning back to us. "Mrs. Collins, your daughter-in-law isn't just a manipulator. She's dangerous. What you've brought me today doesn't just suggest fraud. It opens the door to a pattern. If there's evidence she forged your signature, there may be evidence she tampered with Carol's estate, too. And if she controlled her medication." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Michael's jaw clenched. "You think she killed her?" I think Harris said carefully that Jessica's greed may go further than any of you realized. I'll request Carol's medical records pull the autopsy if there even was one. We'll talk to the insurance companies. If she took out policies on either of you without consent, that's fraud. If she benefited from Carol's death in a suspicious way, we may be looking at something far worse. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, but inside me, the storm raged. For weeks I had been thinking of Jessica as a poisonous intruder, someone who had seduced my husband and sought to steal my home. Now the possibility rose before me like a shadow. What if she wasn't just trying to steal my life figuratively? What if she had intended to erase me, literally? Harris must have seen the flicker in my eyes because his tone softened. You did the right thing, bringing this to me. Stay calm. Don't confront her. Don't give her reason to run. Let us build the case. Michael leaned forward, his voice raw. What if she tries something else in the meantime? Harris shook his head. We'll keep watch. If she's already under suspicion, she'll slip. People like her always do. As we left the precinct, the November air felt sharper, colder. Michael walked beside me, his steps heavy but certain. Linda trailed close, her face pale, but her spine straighter than I had ever seen. They'll get her, Mom, Michael said. Yes, I murmured. But not before she shows us just how far she's willing to go. That night, as I sat in my quiet house, I replayed every smile Jessica had given me, every false word she had spoken at my table. She had called me. Mom had embraced me with arms that now felt like snakes. And all the while, she had been studying me like prey, my routines, my vulnerabilities, my very breath. But she had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the bloodline she was trying to erase. My father had built safeguards for moments like this, though he could never have imagined how twisted the threat would become. Harris had the papers now. Soon, Jessica's own handwriting would testify against her. And if Carol's death was more than bad luck, if Jessica's hands were stained darker than even I feared, then justice would not just be about property or inheritance. It would be about life itself. I closed the curtains tightly that night, the garden outside hidden from view. The roses would sleep through winter, only to bloom again come spring. And so would I. But for Jessica, I sensed the winter she had planted for herself was only just beginning. After we left the precinct with Detective Harris's promise ringing in our ears, I thought I might have a little time. Time to gather my thoughts, to brace myself for the storm that was coming. But storms don't wait for your permission. It happened 3 nights later, just as the November dusk had folded itself around the house. I was in the kitchen, the smell of chicken soup simmering on the stove, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, too heavy, too deliberate. My heart knew before my eyes confirmed. Through the lace curtains, I saw Robert's Mercedes glide to a stop at the edge of the driveway, headlights glaring like accusations. Behind it, a moving truck idled its engine, low and menacing. 2 men in work gloves stepped out, their confusion clear. They weren't sure whose orders they were following, only that they were being paid. Then Jessica appeared. She climbed out of the passenger seat like a queen stepping onto stolen land, her heels sharp against the gravel. Her smile was tight, brittle, but her eyes burned with triumph. Robert trailed behind her shoulders, slumped a man who looked less like a victor and more like someone clutching at the last scraps of a life unraveling. Before I could move, Michael was already there. My son strode out onto the porch, his frame taut, his voice steady in a way I had never heard before. "This is my mother's home," he said firmly. "Not yours, not his, hers. You're not welcome here." Jessica's composure cracked instantly. She threw her arms wide, her voice rising sharp enough to pierce the night. "We've signed everything. This house is mine. Do you hear me?" "Mine?" Michael didn't flinch. He stood tall, blocking the porch steps, his arms crossed like a guard who had finally chosen his post. "You'll never live here. Not one night. Not 1 hour." Robert shifted uneasily behind her, his eyes flickering toward me through the window. But Jessica wasn't watching him. She was focused on Michael, her face contorted with fury. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You couldn't give me the life I deserve, and now you're clinging to her skirts like a little boy. Step aside, Michael, or I'll—" She didn't finish because another figure appeared from the shadows. "Linda." She walked up the driveway slowly, her coat wrapped tight around her, her presence like a quiet blade cutting through the chaos. Jessica froze when she saw her sister, the venom draining from her face for just a moment. "You," Jessica hissed. "Of course. You're the one who poisoned them against me." Linda's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "No, Jessica. You did that yourself. I just told the truth." For a moment, it was as though time held still. Michael on the porch, Jessica seething in the driveway, Robert sagging behind her, Linda standing like a fragile but unshakable witness. The movers glanced at one another, clearly regretting the job they had been hired for. And then I stepped outside. The night air was cold, but I felt nothing but the heat of resolve as I walked calmly to the top of the steps. My hands were steady, my voice quiet enough that they all had to lean in to hear me. "Jessica," I said her name like a verdict. "The police are waiting for you. Detective Harris has everything, your forged signature, your notes, even the questions about your aunt's death. If you have any sense left, you'll get in that car and leave before it's too late." Her face went pale, then red. She spun toward Robert, her voice shrill. "You told me she didn't know. You said we were safe." Robert's mouth opened and closed like a man drowning. "Jessica, But Michael cut him off, his voice sharp as glass. Don't you dare say another word." Jessica's eyes darted wildly between us, searching for a foothold, some sign of weakness. But there was none left. Not in me. Not in Michael. Not even in Linda, who stood trembling but unbroken by her sister's rage. "You think this is over?" Jessica screamed, her voice cracking under its own weight. "You think you've won? I know things. I know secrets that could ruin all of you." I took one step down toward her, my eyes steady, my voice calm as steel. "The only secrets being ruined tonight are yours." For the first time, her bravado faltered. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders curling inward, her hands twitching at her sides. Robert reached for her arm, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Jessica," he whispered, "we need to go." The movers shifted awkwardly, clearly ready to retreat. The truck's engine hummed in the background, waiting for its cargo that would never be unloaded. Jessica glared at me one last time, her voice a low hiss. "This isn't finished." But even she didn't believe it. Robert pulled her toward the car, his grip tight, his face ashen. The movers climbed back into their truck, eager to disappear from the spectacle. Within minutes, the Mercedes and the truck rolled away, swallowed by the night, their red taillights retreating like embers fading in the dark. Silence returned to the driveway, broken only by Michael's ragged exhale. He turned to me, then his eyes wet but burning with something fierce. "Respect." I placed a hand on his arm, my voice low. "It's finished enough." Linda stepped closer, her face pale but resolute. "You were magnificent," she whispered. I looked out at the gravel drive, the roses just beyond it swaying in the night breeze. The house stood behind me, unchanged, unbroken, waiting. And for the first time in months, I felt its walls breathe again. Not with fear, not with betrayal, but with the strength of knowing that the storm had come and I was still standing. The night they drove away from my house, headlights shrinking into the distance, I knew it was only a matter of time. People like Jessica never stop. They crash. And Robert, tethered to her schemes, would be dragged down with her. It didn't take long. Detective Harris called me the following week. His voice was brisk but not unkind. "Mrs. Collins, we've made the arrest. Jessica was taken into custody this morning on charges of insurance fraud. We've also reopened the file on your sister-in-law, Carol. There are inconsistencies with the medication records. It's going to be a long process, but the evidence is strong." I sat very still at my kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling upward. I had imagined this moment, her mask ripped away, her ambitions shackled, but hearing it aloud was something else. A quiet exhale left me neither relief nor joy, but something steadier confirmation. "What about Robert?" I asked. Harris's tone hardened. "We're charging him as a co-conspirator in the financial fraud. The forged documents tie him in directly. Whether he knew about Carol's situation or not, he'll answer for the rest in court." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I had been married to Robert for 44 years. I had once believed we would grow old together, rocking side by side on this very porch. Now he was just another name in a case file. "Thank you, Detective," I said finally. My voice was steady, but inside me something cracked, quiet, and irreparable. News traveled quickly in our small Pennsylvania town. Neighbors whispered in the grocery aisles. Headlines mentioned Jessica's arrest, Robert's charges, the shocking betrayal within a family that had once seemed unshakable. Some pitied me, some gossiped, but I walked through it all with my head high. They didn't know the whole story, and they didn't need to. What mattered was this: the house was mine. Not just the bricks and beams, but the legacy my father had safeguarded decades ago. The trust held firm, untouchable, exactly as he had intended. Jessica's forged insurance policy lay in a police evidence locker. Robert's signatures, the ones he had thought would erase me, now stood as proof of his own downfall. One evening, I walked the halls of the house alone. The cedar beams creaked softly the way they had since the day we moved in. I touched the photographs on the walls, Michael's graduation Christmases, past my parents' framed wedding picture. For the first time in months, I felt the house breathe easy again, as though it had been holding its own secrets, and was finally free to exhale. Michael came often after that. He was pale at first, hollowed by grief, but grief has a way of shaping a man. Slowly, I saw him rebuild piece by piece, day by day. Sometimes we sat in silence, sometimes we talked late into the night about things we had both been too afraid to say before. And Linda was there. At first, just as a quiet companion offering gentle words, brewing tea, sitting with Michael in the garden when words failed him. But soon, I saw the shift. The way Michael looked at her, not with the dazed blindness he once had with Jessica, but with something gentler, steadier. He looked at her as though she were not a prize to be won, but a hand to hold. One evening, I found them on the porch together, the sun dipping low. Michael's hand brushed against hers, tentative but certain. Linda smiled, her eyes soft, in a way I had never seen when she looked at Jessica. It wasn't triumph, it was relief. It was the fragile kind of happiness that grows in the cracks left by sorrow. I stepped back quietly, letting them have the moment. My heart ached for what Michael had lost, but even more it swelled for what he might finally be finding. As for Robert, he sat in a holding cell awaiting his arraignment. I thought of him sometimes, the man I had married, the life we had once shared. But pity is not the same as love, and forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. He had made his choices, and the law would answer them now. Jessica's trial loomed ahead, her name now spoken with disgust in the very circles where she once preened. Whatever charm she had wielded was gone, stripped bare by her own arrogance. Fraud, forgery, suspicion of something darker. Her empire of lies had collapsed. And me, I moved forward. I tended the roses in the yard, their red blooms stubborn against the autumn chill. I cooked for Michael and Linda, their laughter filling the kitchen once more. I wrote in my journal late at night, capturing not just the pain, but the strange gratitude I felt for having survived it. Because in the end, survival was not just about breathing. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, my dignity, my home, my family. As I closed my journal one evening, I whispered into the quiet house, "We're still here." And the house seemed to answer its walls, holding me steady, as though my father's foresight had reached across decades to remind me, storms pass, but roots endure. 6 months passed, and the world rearranged itself in ways I could not have imagined on the night Robert and Jessica tried to move into my house. The headlines had faded, the whispers in town quieted. Jessica remained in county jail awaiting trial, her once bright smile replaced with the weary lines of a woman who had played her last card and lost. Robert faced his charges in court, his name tarnished beyond repair. But here within these cedar walls, life returned. On Thanksgiving morning, the house hummed again with the sounds I thought I had lost forever. Pots clanging in the kitchen, laughter spilling from the living room, the smell of turkey roasting filling every corner. I stood at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, listening to Michael and Linda bicker playfully over the pie crust. Their voices braided together like music, soft and certain, the kind that promised healing was no longer a dream, but a reality. When the meal was served, we gathered around the same table that had once been a stage for betrayal. Now it held bowls of mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and something more precious peace. Michael cleared his throat, nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. He reached for Linda's hand, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "Mom," he said softly, "we have something to tell you." Linda's cheeks flushed as she lifted her left hand, a simple but elegant ring, glinting in the candlelight. "We're engaged," she whispered, her eyes shining with both joy and tears. For a moment, the room blurred as my heart swelled. I reached across the table and clasped their hands in mine. "Then today," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I have more to be thankful for than I ever dreamed." They smiled and laughter bubbled up around the table. It wasn't the sound of forgetting, it was the sound of surviving. But I hadn't forgotten. And I never would. After dinner, as Michael and Linda washed dishes and the house settled into its gentle quiet, I walked into the study where the divorce settlement papers still lay in a locked drawer. The small downtown condo they had tried to banish me to was legally mine. For months, I had wondered what to do with it. A punishment, a symbol of their arrogance. But then one evening, watching the news, I saw a story about a woman who had fled an abusive marriage with nowhere to go. Her face stayed with me, her desperation echoing my own sleepless nights. And I knew. So I made a choice. The condo would not sit empty. It would not rot as a monument to betrayal. Instead, it would become a sheltered temporary housing for women whose lives had been broken by deceit, by cruelty, by men or women who thought love was theirs to exploit. A place where survival could grow into strength. I contacted a local nonprofit, and within weeks the work began. Fresh paint, clean bedding, a stocked pantry. Not grand, but safe. And safety, I had learned, was the first step toward rebuilding. I never put my name on the door. It wasn't about me. But sometimes when the director called to tell me another woman had found refuge there, I felt a quiet warmth settle in my chest. Betrayal had nearly undone me. Now it was being transformed into sanctuary for others. One night, sitting on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I thought of my father. He had built the trust that saved me. He had believed in protecting what mattered most, not just money, but dignity. His foresight had reached across decades to shield me. And in a way, through me, it would shield others too. Michael joined me on the porch, Linda at his side. They sat quietly, sipping cider, watching the stars blink into the dark sky. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Michael reached for my hand. "You've always been stronger than I knew," he said softly. I smiled, my gaze still on the horizon. "Strength isn't loud, Michael. Sometimes it's just refusing to be broken." The wind rustled the roses in the yard, their petals still clinging despite the chill. They had weathered storms just as I had, just as we all had. As Thanksgiving drew to a close, I thought of everything that had been lost: trust, marriage, innocence. But I also thought of what had been found: truth, resilience, and the knowledge that betrayal, no matter how vicious, cannot erase what is deeply rooted. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, and whispered to the night, "We're still here." Because that was the truth. Jessica's schemes had ended in handcuffs. Robert's arrogance had collapsed in a courtroom. And yet here in this house, at this table around this family life, had found a way not just to continue, but to bloom again. That was the final twist. Not revenge, not victory shouted from rooftops, but quiet endurance, patient and certain, turning cruelty into wisdom, betrayal into legacy. And as I looked at my son and the woman who had stood by him when no one else would, I knew the message I would carry for the rest of my days. Betrayal can be cruel, but patience and the wisdom to wait for the right moment will always protect what truly deserves to last.